So again, we've put a bio of minimal achievements of Karen Broadhurst on the screen. Karen is absolutely the leading academic around women and child removal and started the movement of doing research with women, which I think shamefully started in 2014. How it hadn't started earlier than that, I don't know, but our work is, for anyone who hasn't read it, is groundbreaking. And without further ado, I'll introduce you.
So thanks, Amy, for this lovely invitation to the North East. I've just driven up this morning from Lancaster. It was a beautiful drive up the M6 and actually a pretty clear road across the A69, because I hear that the trains have been causing havoc in the city. But yeah, coming in that way, it was a really lovely drive. And I've been wanting to come up to the North East for a while, because obviously need is very high in the North East, but there's also a lot of passion and drive and really innovative activity going on. So as Amy said, I used to be a social worker, and I left social work over a repeat removals case. And I think at that point I was sort of done with child protection, but then I kind of found my way into academia and got a new lease of life, really, as more of an advocate, and found myself in a position where I could actually advocate and challenge and produce really robust data on what was happening. So that's my journey really to where I am now. But I'm still very connected to practice and very, very, very enthused by grassroots initiatives. So just going to my first slide. I mean, the work that me and my team, many of you might have heard of Claire Mason as well, who's a long-standing collaborator of mine. We were lucky enough to produce the first estimate of women in repeat care proceedings in 2014, published it in 2015. And it kind of was really empowering for me, I think, to actually have the statistical evidence behind what I'd seen as a practitioner, where, it felt to me like once you've had a child removed, your card's marked, there's a less patient, there's a more constricted approach to you. And in fact, you're often seen as an easier case because we've been there before, particularly if you come back quickly having had a child removed. So it was great to produce this first estimate, but what was even better about this was we were saying, look, here's a family justice system that's supposed to promote justice for women, but actually you're recycling 1 in 4 women. And actually, if you look at the youngest women, it's 1 in 3. And what I can say now about this area is we've repeated this benchmarking statistics, and it's still very high. We also were able to identify care leavers as a group completely overrepresented in our care system. So again, another real sign of failure of justice. And we were also able to identify a really high rate of newborn babies coming into the care system. And the comparative work that I've done in Australia and the US and New Zealand shows that, we're kind of trumping everybody with our newborn removals. We are high, and you are particularly high in the North East. So we were very excited by this, because what happened as a consequence, the results coincided with the birth of the Innovation Fund. Do you remember Isabel Trowler got behind all of that investment, and services could bid, and there were multiple applications made for what they call repeat removal services. There was PAWS, but there was also lots of other grassroots pioneering projects, a bit like we're seeing here in the North East. So that was amazing to see, and I think all of those projects have really done extremely well to turn the tide. So if I can just have my next slide. So what I would say is that those projects have done really well, but my team have just rerun an analysis of recurrent care proceedings to see where we are now. And we're not, unfortunately, nationally really in a better picture. There's more divide regionally, but we're actually seeing this is a stubbornly resistant problem, and that's because initiatives are too small scale. There's dependent on skeletal funding, so they come and go. So that what's really needed in terms of getting behind lives to affect change, and we know that that is possible, because all of these issues that women come with are treatable, that what we see is the same, and we know that infant removals are continuing to climb. So we published some, I don't know if you've come across our work on the Born into Care series, but we actually published that. We've been publishing a whole load of statistical releases showing again the North East as being particularly high for babies coming into care. particularly high for urgent and short notice proceedings, a number of issues that are quite concerning in terms of justice. Okay, so what I would say, and it is a bit of a dismal conclusion, and I don't want it to be read as any kind of negative thing for those of you who are working on the front line to promote change, but the system has to shift, and it's got to keep shifting if we're going to affect the change in the lives of women, which is possible. Okay, so at the moment we've got a system, as Cris very eloquently described, is overwhelmed with demand, cannot cope, is falling over. And also we have, if we look at the lives of women, women feel re-victimised by the system, they do not feel empowered, they do not understand the system. There's been lots and lots of demand for more lay approaches to justice, for plain English, etc. But we still have a system that essentially is fairly incomprehensible and that is cycling people through at a faster rate. And Cris, again, I think you touched on that. You know, and we know also that if you've had a child removed before, your proceedings are likely to be shorter the second time round. Okay, so what can we do about all of this? So next slide, please. So what I would say is, for all of those of you who are delivering outreach, intensive relationship-based practice, keep on. This is a solution. So we absolutely need intensive case-based outreach work that goes out to people, that understands trauma, as Cris was also saying, doesn't expect people to keep to appointments routinely or rigidly, actually goes out into the community and forms those relationships. That needs to continue alongside group work and allowing women to have communal exchange, and dads too, of course. I've got a passionate interest in women in the justice system, but I know also about the vulnerability of dads. So all of that needs to go on, in particular creating a kind of opportunity, I think, for connection between women who've had children removed to break down stigma. But there is the bigger picture here. And I think that the people offering this kind of intensive relationship-based support, we do lots of work in Wales, where Wales is relatively a poor country to the UK, but it's more comparable to the North East. You know, the Reflect programme, which has been rolled out by government up there, to every local authority, is brilliant, says that they're completely, really up against the socio-economic context of lives, and in particular, housing and mental health. So I would say our practice pioneers say it's really difficult to make the case for pooling of budgets. All of those boundaries still exist. So what my team's trying to do is to produce new evidence about the wider context of lives using large-scale linked data, because government will tend to listen to the numbers and the statistics. They then want the stories, but you always have to say how many and how much. Everything's monetised. Okay, so next slide, please. So I think at the moment we're rarely counting the cost of family need across services. Our thinking is still quite siloed, and what we're finding is families being very frustrated by the fact that they're trying their best, but they do need a house. They do need mental health treatment that was recommended in proceedings. So I would say there is indisputable evidence that we need a far closer join-up. And obviously the Independent Care Review is recommending this. We don't know whether the government's going to get behind that with money, but we have to join up the dots and deal with the wider context of lives. Otherwise, those of you who are practitioners are going to keep coming up against the same barriers. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of new statistical evidence to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so we have a team of researchers working with large-scale data sets in Wales, where we've got a steady flow of health data. In England, if we try and get health data, we'll be waiting about 4 years, and we have to pay thousands of pounds for it. It's like banging your head against a brick wall. We're still banging our heads, but... So we're using Wales as a kind of case study, if you like. So what we're doing is linking families in the court system to their health records, their mental health records, their substance, their maternity, to build that bigger picture. And from that work, there is an overwhelming evidence of heightened mental health need, pre-care proceedings for these families, and obviously post-care proceedings too. But if you look at the kind of mental health need that's here, this is why it's so incredibly important that our health system, our public health system, think about this, because the cost of the kind of usage is very high. So if I show you this, so I've got my cohort here. if you like, that's my so-called treatment group. Sorry to the mums in the room. That's the mums and the dads, the blue. And then I've got a comparison, general population comparison, matched on age and deprivation. Okay, so we're not comparing with middle-class families who've had it good. We're comparing matched, but we still see this huge difference between our parents in care proceedings and the matched comparison group against all measures of health, but in particular, emergency hospital admission, maternity admission, emergency department attendance. If we look at elective, planned, not much difference. But what we can see here is crisis mental health behaviour. So a failure upstream to prevent that and a gap in the system. And this is extremely expensive. So if I go on to my next slide, I've got two more. Emergency mental health admissions. Look at this. And you can also see the gendered nature of this. So mental health admissions, emergency mental health admissions here, very, very high for mothers and fathers. Sorry, this should say emergency health admissions, that's my mistake, I've copied it across. But you can see as we go down, for what reason are people going into hospital on an emergency basis? How much does that cost our system? It's about £1,000 a night for an emergency bed. There we are, mental health again. Okay, so if we go on to our next slide, and then I've got one more and I'm done. Injury related to emergency, again, pre-care proceedings. This is in the prevention space. We've got injury, accident, assault and self-harm. Again, very high for mums and dads. There's a real issue here about crisis mental health behaviour. This evidence is based on population, full population, matched to an equally deprived group but outside of care proceedings. So we can then see how important mental health is. I could give you the same picture for housing, but I haven't got time today. But let's just go on to my last slide. Okay, so quotes for parents. Parents need to take away from our justice system some sense of justice. That's one of the reasons why I've always been a fan of the drug treatment courts, because I think that those treatment courts give people a fairer sense of justice. They go away with lower levels of hostility towards the state. But currently we've got an adversarial system of winners and losers largely, but also people totally frustrated because they know what help they need and they can't get it. And I think one of the things that's particularly pernicious is for an expert to tell you within care proceedings that you need mental health therapy and you can't get it. And then you're pregnant again and you go back and they say, well, sorry, but you didn't get your treatment. So this is a system in which there's a huge recovery challenge for women with fragile and restricted social statuses who then come up against this kind of injustice. So another parent says, I was so upset when they removed my baby. We know women take a mental health dip after child removal. Self-harm, suicide risk is much greater, as is getting into relationships that aren't good for you, homelessness. This person ends up being sectioned, and then because she didn't make contact, that was held against her. So you can see why people feel so deeply upset and angry. Here we go, we're living in a tent in my mother's garden. They said we couldn't have our baby back because we were homeless. Okay, so homelessness, common mental health issues. So when we've done a mental health analysis, it's anxiety and depression coupled with, but to a less degree, substance misuse. For anxiety and depression, smoking or overriding, actually substance misuse is about 50% less. It's not all drugs and alcohol, but they go together. These are treatable issues. Housing is a treatable issue. You can give someone a house. We can treat people for mental health. It's not, the system as we have it is not, we shouldn't take it for granted that all these people just need to have all their children removed. It's not the case. And I think for all of you who are working on the front line and the intensive pioneering projects that we see proliferating around the country, keep going, but we need a lot more of you. But we also need to tackle these wider issues. Okay, thank you.